Some heavyweights in state politics say they support a leadership shakeup in the Rochester City School District. If you thought the idea of mayoral control had died down years ago, it's back. Assemblyman David Gant is pushing for reform by recently introducing 2 bills to the state legislature. Both would take power away from the school board. Gant says a change is essential because, quote, we can't just let kids sit there and die on the vine. Mayoral control has its share of supporters and opponents, one critic being Rochester School Board President Van White, who joins me now. And welcome back, Van. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
So mayoral control of districts is obviously perceived differently by different people based on their role in public education. So Van, what does this concept mean to you as president of the school board?
Well, I'm just going to key on one phrase that you use. I don't know if it's a quote from David Gant, but when you talk about dying on the vine, the reality is, sadly, kids are dying in our streets, in their homes. Kids are dying, at least mentally and spiritually, in our courthouses. Families are dying in our hospitals because of inadequate health care. So the question has to become not who is to blame, but who's going to be part of the solution. So I think the narrative about that the problems begin at the school door is a mistake, because the reality is 14621 is a district in our community, the northeast side of the city, that has been described in various ways. It's been often referred to as the crescent because it's a concentration of poverty there. And that's been going on for years, since and before David Gant got there, and it still continues to this day. The reality is I would never blame David Gant for what is going on there any more than I would think that he would blame the thousands of people that work day in and day out. The question is it about control for one person, or is it about control for an entire community? So it should be about principal control, parent control, preacher control, superintendent control, police control, neighborhood control. There's no one person that's going to fix this problem. And that's the problem with mayoral control. It's sort of this Superman complex, that the idea that one person could solve this problem.
So you don't think, in terms of, you say it's a Superman complex, you don't think that different people can weigh in then? If in fact mayoral control were to take place, you don't think that different voices can add to the conversation and that the mayor would take that into consideration and carry it out?
Well, I tell you, that's what's happening now. I mean, for example, look at East High School. We brought in a major community partner, the University of Rochester, the #1 employer in that region. And what has happened since we brought them in, not one person, but a whole institution that has all kinds of jobs and education that they can bring to the table? What happened? And 3 years ago, East High School's 4-year graduation rate was 31%. Now it's at 61. Not one person did that. An entire community, including our largest employer, did that. Number 17 school, which is a school which we call the Beacon School. Mayor Warren is involved in that school. A whole community of people are involved in transitioning that school. That school has had some success in terms of performance indicators. The moral of this story, of these stories, is that not one person, these success stories, is not one person is responsible for the change, but a community of people. So if David Gant or Mayor Warren are talking about bringing in community partnerships and supporting good people that are already working, indulge me for a moment. Since the last 12 years, the graduation rate has gone like this. Here's the irony. When David Gant first proposed this in 2007, do you know what the 4-year graduation rate was? I'll tell you, it was 39%. It's now 59%. So if it wasn't needed then, when our graduation rate was just 39%, why would people upend the apple cart when in fact our graduation rate is 20% points higher? That doesn't mean there's great work to be done. But the point is, who's going to do that work? And we submit it should be at the community.
So let me jump in. So the mayor spoke with WXXI's James Brown yesterday, and she said that she's tried to get in touch with the district, the board, to talk about this in more detail, and that there has been pushback in the past when she's tried to partnership. So what would you say to that when you're saying we can all get together and we can work on this to help bring change if she's having a hard time getting in touch?
Well, in my business, my other line of business, I'm a lawyer, we would call that hearsay. So I wouldn't dare, and in your line of business, you probably wouldn't necessarily rely on that. I can tell you this, I can show you the texts, the emails, the memos that reflect a one-on-one conversation between Mayor Warren and I. I can show you memorandums of understanding, so how we can work together between the rec centers and our schools. We've developed specific memorandums of understanding so that we can exchange information about students. So it's just not accurate what you are hearing. And I don't think Mayor Warren would say that, because I know she and I have talked regularly and frequently about the status of the schools, including conversations about mayoral control. So it's just not, and I gave another example, number 17 school. So it's just not accurate, the information that you are getting. I didn't hear her say that, and it doesn't sound like you heard her say that. I can tell you this. I can show you emails and texts. I can show you a memorandum of understanding about how we're going to work together, our rec centers and our schools. I can show you agenda items and times in which she and I have gone to elementary schools to read to kids. I can show you extensive meeting minutes about number 17 school, the Beacon School. So it's just not accurate to say that the mayor does not have direct line of communication with myself.
And again, this was not saying that she did not have a direct line of communication. It was that recently when trying to get in touch. I just want to clarify that.
Well, and I want to be clear. I can show you a memorandum of understanding about how we agreed to communicate so that if a child goes into a rec center and he's not been in school all day, that officials who otherwise at the rec center who would not have access legally to a child's academics record can now get access to it. So that's a recent agreement. So
I'm gonna just because I know our time is limited, I'm gonna move on. So the Center for American Progress, which is a nonpartisan policy institute, released a report a few years ago examining mayoral control, and it looked into two specific things: resource management and student achievement. In short, the report found that mayoral governance has improved urban districts, and it especially pointed out that's if the mayor is heavily invested in public education. So I want to know, all that being said, why do you think there's not enough evidence that something like this could work in Rochester?
Well, I mean, for every report that you can show that it does work, you can show the research reports that show that it doesn't. For every city that it has worked in, you can probably show 2 cities and not. New York City, it seems to have worked pretty well. Chicago, not so much. I mean, have you seen the headlines in Chicago? Schools closing, unions on strike for months on end. I don't necessarily think that that's the answer for Rochester. It may work in New York City, it didn't work in Chicago. We have to look for our own answer. And the other thing that I would reflect upon is this community just spent 2 months designing a plan in response to what Dr. Aquino said. We provided a response. It was 110 pages long, very specific in terms of who was to do what, when they were supposed to do it, and what exactly they were supposed to do. Before we start upending the apple cart and throwing out all the apples in the apple cart, I suggest that what we do is we be deliberative, methodical, and careful about the next step. We did what the commissioner asked us to do, which is to provide a serious, meaningful response to Dr. Aquino's recommendations. Let the commissioner take a look at that.
I want to give just a little bit of background for our viewers who may not be tuned into this. This was the distinguished educator that was commissioned by the State Education Commissioner, Jaime Aquino, and he came out with this report that it was tough on the district. It was also tough on the board as well. And in response, the board released a 110-page plan really trying to implement what it wants to do in terms of moving forward. Tim Macaluso of the city newspaper, he covered that meeting and he covered the vote. I don't know if you saw his recent...
I was at the meeting.
But his recent report, he said board members at this meeting show little indication they're committed to working together to resolve their differences and lead by example.
Okay, let's look at that. I think the headlines read divided vote. The vote was 4-2. In what democracy would that be called a divided vote? That happens in Congress. That happens, my God, that happens in the New York State Assembly all the time. 4-2. That's a majority vote. The two people that he's referring to had some real disagreements. But you know what? That's what democracy is about. Have you watched the parliament in Great Britain lately? That democracy sometimes exists by people exercising the right. Do we want to tell our children that democracy is not successful if there's a dissenting vote? No. Certainly we wouldn't do that. The vote was 4-2. I said at a meeting just recently, I don't know if Tim caught that. I have a lot of respect for him, but I said, understand this, my colleagues, we all own that vote now. No one board member, but every board member has a right to speak under the First Amendment. But now that is our vote. That 110-page report has to be owned by the entire Board of Education. So the fact that 2 board members, one was absent, I think, and another board member didn't vote, but we have a total of 7 members on the Board of Education. There were 6 there. 4 voted in favor of it and spoke very positive about it. So the headline sometimes feeds this narrative that is inconsistent with democratic principles. In what nation, other than the United States of America, could you speak out about something and then be called, oh, that's dysfunctional? That's what we do in America.
Well, talk to me, Van. Tell me, and just in terms of how the school board looks, how does the school board take ownership of the current state of what's going on with city school kids. What type of ownership does the board take in that?
Well, we issued 110-page rule. You know, it took us a year and a half with state permission, repeated extensions, to design a plan for East High School. One high school, which at the time had 1,800 students. One high school, which was the worst performing high school. The state agreed to give us over a year and a half to do the redevelopment plan. And look where that's gone. 30% increase in the graduation rate. So that's what we continue to do.
And is the board heavily involved in terms of what's happening at East as well?
Well, people need to understand that's not a charter school, that's not a private school. That school is run by the Board of Education. That whole redesign was driven by the Board of Education. So people need to understand that, and that, by the way, coincidentally, was never mentioned in the Distinguished Educators Report.
Say that. Say what? What was not mentioned?
The success of East High School and how they've achieved that success. Also, what was not mentioned in the Distinguished Educators Report is the fact that the state recently designed this receivership system. 5 of our receivership schools came off the receivership list altogether. One of them did what only one other school did in New York State, which is to go from receivership to good standing. None of that stuff was mentioned. So my point is, there's a lot of stuff that we need to do and fix. We need the community to do that. But I also want people to know there's a lot of stuff that is moving in the right direction. The graduation rate is going like this. The out-of-school suspension rate is going dramatically down like this. And what's happening at East High School can only be described as unprecedented. So we'll continue to do that, but we'll also continue to look for partners who can make this district better than it currently is.
All right, we have to close for now, but first, Van, I want to thank you for your time. Sure. And we will have you back on the show if, in fact, Assemblyman Gant's bills are voted on by the legislature. Sure. So we'll continue this conversation. Until then, we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on mayoral control? Is it a yay or a nay, and why? Post your comments on Twitter using the hashtag NTKWXXI.